Good afternoon to everyone joining us from Asia, and good morning to all of you in Europe. I'm Michael Lawrence. Welcome to Asia House, and today's session, Leveraging Digital Innovation to Achieve Net Zero in Asia. Thank you very much for being with us. This is part of our COP26 series. Today, we'll explore how companies can leverage innovative technologies to establish themselves as climate leaders. We'll also consider the opportunities that organizations have to really shift the dial on climate change and set the pace in the race to zero. We're producing today's conference in partnership with Accenture. Many thanks to Accenture for working with us on this critically important discussion. We've assembled some of the leading thinkers on technology and how it can drive the race to net zero. And we've kindly agreed to share their insights with us today. I'm very much looking forward to speaking with them. It would not be an understatement to say that there's been a tectonic shift in attitudes towards climate change within governments, companies, investors, and society at large over the last year or more. At the beginning of the pandemic, there were real fears that climate change would drop down the agenda as the world grappled with the COVID-19 health crisis and the subsequent economic downturn. But that's not been the case. In fact, it seems the contrary is true. China, the US, Japan, and South Korea are among the nations that have announced more ambitious net zero targets in the last 12 months. And one can reasonably expect a flurry of announcements in the lead up to and at COP26 in Glasgow in November. That said, many parts of Asia are in the midst of another wave of the pandemic, putting at risk their modest economic recoveries. And this poses a dilemma for policymakers who face the challenge of driving to net zero while still supporting economic growth in the short and medium term. But climate change is now part of the mainstream within governments, the broad political discourse globally, and businesses world over. And while setting ambitious targets at a government level is essential, delivering those targets will require the commitments of businesses and societies and the use of innovative technology. In the past, many organizations saw transitioning to carbon neutrality as a burden. Now, increasingly, companies are recognizing the opportunities it presents. Sustainability is not only good in itself, but maybe one of the biggest drivers of business competitiveness over the coming decade. And that's one of the key themes we'll be exploring today. Now, Kono Taro, Japan's Minister for Administrative Reform, was due to be speaking with us today, but the resignation of Japan's Prime Minister last week and the political turmoil which has followed has meant the minister has sadly had to withdraw. He sends his sincere apologies. Now, media reports suggest Kono Taro is the frontrunner in the contest to become the next Japanese Prime Minister, so we understand why domestic issues may have prevented him from joining us today. But we do hope to welcome Kono Taro back to Asia House in the near future. Let's get on with today's program. In a moment, I'll be speaking with Peter Lacey, Accenture's Chief Responsibility Officer and Global Sustainability Services Lead. We'll then hear from Mauro Petriccioni, who's Director General for Climate Action at the European Commission, and Ampi Aswin, Head of Supply Chain and Logistic Industry Solutions, Aipac, at Google Cloud. We want you to be part of the session. Mauro, Ampi, and Peter are all keen to take your questions, so please engage in that dialogue. A little later in the session, I'll be speaking to David Wallerstein, Chief Exploration Officer at Tencent, where our focus will be on artificial intelligence and how that can be a key driver to achieve net zero. These are fascinating and, as I said, critically important issues for business, policymakers, and society. So many thanks for joining us for today's discussion. Well, to get underway, let me introduce now Peter Lacey. Peter is Accenture's Chief Responsibility Officer and Global Sustainability Services Lead. He oversees the integration of sustainability in all client work. And Peter's work spans environmental, social, and governance issues. He previously led Accenture's strategy in Europe and Asia Pacific and helped launch the company's sustainability practice in 2008. Peter, thank you very much for joining us. Really good to see you. Now, I want to start with how you and your clients, I guess, now view sustainability. Has there been a major shift in perception? Is it now seen as an opportunity and essential, in fact, to remain competitive rather than a burden?
Yes, I think is the answer. So firstly, thank you very much, Michael. And thank you to Asia House for continuing to be such a fantastic bridge for business between Europe, Asia, internationally. I think you covered a lot of the issues extremely well, Michael, in your opening. And I would say over the last 18 months, the increase in focus on sustainability has been just extraordinary with amongst top executives, amongst business leaders. So I've been focused on this agenda now for 20 years, and we've seen different waves of sustainability over that period. If you go back to 2006, 2007, I think we all thought that particularly around the transition to a low carbon economy and climate change, that we'd hit the tipping point. You know, we had the Stern report, we had Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth, we had the McKinsey cost curves, which I was still there at that time. We've got next the European lead on climate change. You know, the European Union set out incredibly ambitious goals for 2020 at that point in time. And of course, we had probably the most challenging IPCC report. But then the global financial crisis came along and really put a lot of the action that we should have been taking on climate change on the back burner. We then came to Paris in 2015. I think, again, we thought that this was the tipping point. And we then had more broadly on sustainability, the launch of the SDGs just after Paris. And then came, well, let's be careful what we say, but let's say that the US administration didn't help with progress globally on sustainability.
Indeed.
And, you know, I think that's probably the best way I can put it.
Very eloquent, very discreet, yes.
But this, I think, is a different wave, and it is a different sense amongst top business leaders. I work almost exclusively with CEOs and top boards on this topic around the world, and I don't think this is going to disappear from here. I don't think it's going to disappear from a policy and regulatory perspective. It's certainly not going to disappear from a scientific perspective. You only have to look around the world at the wildfires in the US or in Australia. You look at the droughts around the world affecting crops and supply chains. You look at the floods in Germany, even recently, or myself, I sit on the board of a NASDAQ company that's focused on sustainable farming in Newark, and we're literally bailing water out of the base as a result of the storms in the US. So it's here to stay. Businesses get it. I'm just about to, with Accenture, launch in 2 weeks time now, at the UN General Assembly Week, the 7th of our triennial CEO studies with the United Nations on sustainability. And without sort of saying things that I shouldn't yet say, what I will say is this last study I have never seen before. So I do 100 one-to-ones with CEOs, and we survey 1,000 globally. And I have never seen the clarity amongst CEOs that climate change is impacting their global supply chains and their resiliency now, not in the future. In the past, I think it's always been at the margins, where they are talking about two twin forces that are disrupting global supply chains, which are incredibly relevant, I think, for Asia in this conversation, which is the pandemic and sustainability. The third one being the sort of global regionalization and politics side of things. Now that then brings me to my next point, and yeah, then I'll let you kind of keep the conversation going. This is no longer a nice to have. It's not a group of marginal companies that are doing this because they think it's the right thing, corporate responsibility, philanthropic efforts. It's, it really is now core to business, and not just the businesses that have been at this for a long time, like the utilities where renewables has been, and energy efficiencies, or automotive and electrification. Those industries have been pushing this agenda for a long time. This is now becoming core to the competitiveness of almost every industry. And over the next decade, what we will see, our very, very strong research-backed view, our view on the future of competitiveness at the level of the firm, is that business value and competitiveness will be driven by sustainability and by the digital revolution and the fourth industrial revolution. And I think we've always known that for a while. On the fourth industrial revolution set of technologies, you're going to talk about AI as being one of the most important there, but human genomics and the clean energy revolution just being other parts of that fourth industrial revolution. But sustainability is a new axis of competitiveness that is going to be intensified enormously. And the new competitiveness and the new DNA will be how you manage the trifecta of shareholder value, sustainability impact, and technology disruption. That's the reality. Give you a couple of stats. In our sustainable organization study, those organizations that are doing that, managing that trifecta, what we call managing and transitioning to the new sustainability DNA of competitiveness, generated on average 21% greater profits and 21% higher ESG scores, the top quartile versus the bottom quartile. Between 2013 and 2019, companies with consistently higher environmental, social, and governance performance enjoyed 4.7 times higher operating margins and lower volatility in their share price than ESG performers, than lower ESG performers. And we see it all the time. I'm sure we'll hear from Google, but the migration to the public cloud can reduce CO2 emissions by our analysis by 59 million tons per year. Taking 22 million cars off the road would be required in order to do that. And I think we're about to launch it's interesting, the Japanese Prime Minister, and I wish him well in the next couple of weeks. But Japan is top in the region, according to a global sustainability index that we'll launch next week, and tops it for social and governance issues, tops it for environmental issues, whereas ASEAN top it for social and governance issues. So there's a real latent competitive advantage that we see there in Japan as well, that I think is worth noting. I'll sort of stop there. I could give you multiple examples of companies that are making a good fist of this. I mean, Takeda is a good one that we've been working with recently. We helped Takeda move 80% of its systems to the public cloud. It reduced power consumption from IT by 80% and carbon emissions by 85%, while cutting its data center costs by 60 million. So that's just a good example. I leave that one because it was sort of zoning in from, this is a major issue. It's now the new determinant, I think will stay so, of competitiveness. Competitiveness will depend on the intersection of shareholder value, sustainability, impact, and technology. And I gave you the Japan example of a country that is really moving on this, but also one of their largest pharmaceutical, I think probably their largest pharmaceutical company, Takeda, using cloud and the journey to cloud as one example of sustainability technology reinforcing competitiveness.
We talk about innovative technologies, but technology is a very broad sweep of things. What are you seeing from your clients? Is it shifting to the cloud, which sounds like a very relatively straightforward way of reducing emissions? Is it adoption of clean energy? Is it wind? Is it solar? How do you even begin to categorize the technology that one needs to drive net zero if you're a company CEO?
Well, I think the answer is that you run the analytics. I mean, put simply, you run the analytics to understand where your industry choke points are on climate change and carbon, and where the opportunities sit, using analytics that assess the potential for abatement, the need for adaptation, and where it is that you can go after the largest prize from an economics perspective, as well as your sustainability impact. So it's trading off that trifecta is the answer, right? So where's the technology disruption that enables you to do something different? Where's the money? Where's the biggest abatement potential? Now that's sort of a bit of a trite answer, because it's sort of, but that is true. I think there are four areas that we see where technology is truly changing what's possible within business. Now, almost all of these examples are the intersection of physical and digital technologies. So if you think of the three types of technology disruption that are driving sustainability, physical, biological, and digital, they're enabling us to do things that we haven't been able to do previously because of the extraordinary engineering and scientific breakthroughs that are happening in all those spaces, and the logarithmic cost curve reduction, for example, in things like solar energy, renewables. But all of them come together. So you need all, and often digital is the backbone. 75% of CEOs we interviewed said that digital is the backbone for their business in connecting business performance to even the physical technologies like renewables, like energy efficiency, like storage, and so on. Now, the four that I would give you the example of, one is cloud, and what I gave you the example of is more that we believe, and we've measured that 64% emissions reduction is just simply moving to the cloud. So that's just consolidating servers from on-premises to off-premises, managing, better putting server farms in places where they should be, where you've got natural cooling, these sorts of issues. Then when you're in the cloud, you manage things better by managing coding, by actually actively thinking about energy usage in the coding that you do and the impact that that has on physical devices, notifications, and so on. The really interesting thing, though, is the third layer, which is how the cloud then enables you to create new business models for your customer and your customer's customer. So, for example, utilities being able to provide end consumers with the services they need to green their homes, right? So that's the fundamental shift of the cloud. It's not just a technology play, it actually changes your interaction with your consumer, with your ability in your business model. The second technology is related to artificial intelligence. I'm sure our colleague from Tencent is going to say something of the same, because the backbone of all of this is that we're rewiring the global economy to assess its performance in a different way, right? From a GDP perspective, you can see behind me the SDGs, and also the climate stripes. We are not going to hold governments accountable anymore just for GDP. We're going to hold them accountable for their carbon transition strategies and for their performance against the 17 SDGs and 164 sub-metrics, right? So that's that level. Shareholders in the capital markets are now demanding ESG data of far more sophistication, far more reliability, far more accuracy to make their decisions from an investment perspective. And in firms, working with firms right across the technical spectrum and software and enterprise performance, we're enabling executives and boards and CEOs right down to the manager in procurement buying pens and pencils to make decisions about what the impact is, not just cost, quality, availability, but also the carbon footprint or the sustainability metrics. So the second is around ESG data analytics, artificial intelligence, and being able to mine that data in new ways to produce actionable insight. The third is really around what we call the Internet of Things, or what we call Industry X, connected physical infrastructure with digital infrastructure with sustainability metrics. So buildings, plants, assets, manufacturing capabilities, fleets, and logistics. The Internet of Things and the incredible, again, logarithmic cost curve reduction of sensors, so that you are now able to put sensors in so many more things and produce the data that allows you to understand the performance on financial business metrics, but now also sustainability. And then the fourth one I would point out is ERP software, that now almost all of the big players are adding to their suite of capabilities the ability and the modules to manage everything from consumer data on sustainability to core business data to supply chain and procurement data on sustainability, and creating transparency and traceability through scope 1, 2, 3 emissions. So giving increasingly forensic, actionable insight. So that's only four, but those are four good examples of technology powering sustainability.
Brilliant. Well, look, it's a good time now to bring in our other guests, and I'm delighted to.
And I mean, I'm drinking my Chinese tea, Michael, by the way.
No, so, enjoy it. Enjoy it. I know you've been up early. Very delighted to welcome now Mauro Petruccioni, who is Director General for Climate Action for the European Commission, a position he's held since March 2018. In that time, the EU has announced its climate law, which puts tough emissions cutting targets at the heart of EU policymaking. The bill sets targets to reduce net EU emissions by 55% by 2030, that's from 1990 levels, and eliminate net emissions by 2050. It also includes the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which has triggered considerable debate among businesses and policymakers. I'm also delighted to be joined by Ampi Asman. Ampi is Google Cloud's Aipac Industry Solutions Director for Supply Chain and Logistics. In her role, she helps organizations solve transformation challenges and unlock opportunities for customers to drive value and growth. Before joining Google Cloud, Ampi had 24 years of supply chain experience at Unilever, so very, very experienced in this space. Thank you both for joining us. Mauro, let me start with you. Give us an overview of the EU's climate ambitions and importantly, how you see technology and digital innovation factoring into it.
Thank you very much. And first of all, very happy to be back with Asia House. And thanks for this invitation in particular. And let me thank Peter Lacey for setting the scene, because I think you'll see what I have to say is very much complementary. It's a different facet of this problem. I'd like to make 4 points. Let me start with 2 points on how we're doing things. You mentioned our target, the 55% by 2030, the net zero target by 2050. Very happy in the discussion to add details. But I think, what we're trying to do in terms of the proposal we made is rather well known. But let me say two things about what's behind it, what underlies this. I think it's important to understand and how it relates then to everybody else and to business in particular. I mean, the first one is that we have battled for years with climate skepticism. We're winning that battle. And unfortunately, we're winning that battle because not only the science is clearer and clearer and leaves less and less space for doubt, but because the change is in front of our nose. We are beginning to suffer serious damage from climate change on everyday life. And that's not just, the big events, the tornadoes, the floods. This is about ordinary disruption. It is the fact that river transportation isn't as good as it used to be because in summer, you cannot load the barges as much as you did. I mean, to the extreme of navigation on the Elbe being obstructed by the fact that the ammunition dumps that were thrown there in 1945 are now beginning to be touchable by the bottom of a barge. I mean, that's a level of detail of disruption we're suffering. But underneath, behind this skepticism, the real obstacle that we had to a solid climate policy is the fear of losing out. Is this a change that's going to be too difficult, too complicated, too costly? Do we have the money? Do we have the resources? What does it do to my power supply? What does it do to my costs? Can I afford it? I think that is the real problem, and that's the problem we have to tackle. So my second point is that what Europe is trying to do, we're setting ourselves up to be the working model of how a net zero emission economy can work. We have to do it for ourselves. We have to do it because there's a moral case for Europe to do its part. But in practical terms, even if Europe were to be net zero tomorrow, we don't really matter. We don't matter that much. Where we can really help is to show how in the 21st century, you can run a net zero economy, which is competitive, which is modern, and gives you a prosperous society, gives you good jobs. We won't have the kind of consensus that we need if we don't do that. Now, we do have what it takes. Perhaps we don't have it all, but we have most of the technologies we need. We have most of the resources we need. Okay, we're borrowing them from future generation, which adds to the pressure for giving it back. We have an unprecedented level of popular consensus that you don't find in many other places in the world. So now, 2 points on how do we work with others that will illustrate that with a couple of examples from Asia. And how do we work with the corporate sector? What do we expect from the corporate sector? And what is the role of tech into this? I mean, first, we are pursuing a policy of alliances with those who can espouse the same model that we are proposing now. The biggest example of that is Japan. And that's the same rationale that led us to establish an economic partnership agreement with Japan. Our societies are very similar, our economies are very similar, our economies are very intertwined, and Japan's awareness and consciousness of what it needs to do, not only to do its part on climate change, but also to modernize its economy and keep it competitive, is very, very close to what the thinking is in Europe. So Japan was a natural ally. We've not aligned on everything 100%. There will continue to be differences, there will continue to be debate, but fundamentally, that's why we have launched a green alliance with Japan. With others, we are trying to build an increasing level of cooperation, depending on what they can and what they want to do. China has a 2060 goal. China is engaged in the same debate we're having. Okay, if we have this 2060 goal, how do we get there? What do we need to do in the next 10 years? They haven't solved that debate. The Chinese debate is unfortunately more opaque than it is elsewhere, and this opaqueness favors the conservatives. But the debate is the right one. And we are trying to help the Chinese. We cooperate on economic modeling. We have cooperated for China to launch its emission trading system. With other countries, we're doing a very different type of cooperation. My other example is India. With India, we're working to build the conditions for moving away from their massive dependence on coal. India has a fantastic program on renewables. We're trying to support them in that. We're working with the Indians on adaptation. And you have, within this range, cooperation with all sorts of other countries. Now, companies and tech. Look, I won't repeat what Peter Lacey said. I subscribe to that entirely. And I was very happy to hear what he said, because seen from our angle, we see a lot of companies that fit that picture. But we also see a lot of companies who can't afford, who don't have the technology, who are not competitive. Some of them are living hand to mouth. And those are the companies that politicians worry about, because that's where you lose jobs. So I think our picture is very similar, perhaps a little bit less rosy, because it doesn't focus only on the best part of our economy, but also on the parts which are weaker. But very much agree with what he said. And that in the end is our model, is what we want to achieve. How do we fit into this transformation? Let me just give you a couple of examples. Energy. If we want to transform energy supply, it's not enough to invest in renewables. You need energy grids, you need energy storage. You need to move to a model where you centralize less the production of energy and bring the production of energy at least partly closer to where it's used. You can't do that without digital technology. Mobility. We have to move transport towards mobility. We have to get to the stage where in our cities, an individual can choose and combine different modes of transport in one mobility concept. How are you going to do that without digital instruments? And the biggest example is perhaps building renovation. Building renovation, building efficiency is no longer a matter of insulation, of shutting the outside world out. It's a matter of having intelligent buildings, having buildings which use and exploit different materials, different technology solutions, full of sensors, full of instruments, full of the ability of the individual to use the building intelligently without waste. So at the end of the day, this is also a very, very high-tech agenda.
Okay, thank you very much. We do want to go to questions. We already have a couple lined up. In a few moments, I'll come to Adam Keswick from Jardines, but let me first go to you, Ampi. Peter mentioned earlier about transition to cloud technology as being a fantastic contributor to the push for net zero emissions. Give me a sense of what Google's doing specifically in Asia to enable companies to contribute to the drive for zero emissions.
Okay, let me start with the cloud technology and give a flavor to everyone what cloud is enabling in terms of companies' ambition to then go to net zero. Carbon-free 24/7. Is that even possible? This is by far Google's most ambitious commitment in its third decade of climate action, to be carbon-free 24/7 by 2030. We are committed to sustainability as a company, as a partner, and as an enabler. And I want to start with ourselves and how we operate our business more sustainably. It's our responsibility, and we believe that it's also the best way to innovate, iterate, and share best practices with others. So with regards to the cloud operation, our journey in sustainability started since our inception. So we have achieved carbon neutrality in 2007. We have matched our energy use with 100% renewable energy in 2017. And it's not just about shifting energy source, and I wanted to highlight this one, that it's also about tapping into artificial intelligence and machine learning to use less energy in our operations. Talk about cheaper sensors. So being able to draw this data and analytics to be able to predict how do you then best adjust your processing parameters needed to then deliver the most efficiency gains. We recognize that moving towards carbon-free won't be easy. And we're focused at leading at Google, supporting our partners and enabling everyone to be part of the solution to climate change. So with regards to how we are helping our partners, just by moving to cloud, and this is from an IDC study, I'll quote another number, wherein you'll be able to reduce 1 billion tons of CO2 emission by 2024. So just simply the act of moving to cloud will already help companies decarbonize their IT footprint. Another example that I would like to share, and this is in this region, in Indonesia, is Google's partnership with Unilever in addressing deforestation. So by combining the power of Google Earth's engine and cloud computing, Unilever is able to have better visibility, traceability, and transparency of its source material. And what does this do? This ultimately raises the accountability across its suppliers in the value chain. And this helps end deforestation and regenerate nature. And this is specifically on the palm plantation in Sumatra. And this will then follow with other plantations that Unilever is looking at. The other thing that I would talk about when you talk about cloud computing is the work with, not directly, but as a function of efficiency gains with UPS, we're able to then help them reduce their fuel consumption by 10 million gallons every year because of better fleet routing, better optimization. So by driving efficiency, you're also indirectly also impacting sustainability. So those are a couple of examples that I can then just share in terms of what we're doing in the area of artificial intelligence, machine learning, power of Google Earth's engine, and cloud computing to then help expose, drive better visibility. So ultimately, we spoke about data. Data allow you to then understand the magnitude of the problem and where you're going to focus your solutions.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thanks. I want to turn over, get some questions now from the audience. And Peter, I'll ask you to come into this session as well. Let me go first to Adam Keswick of Jardines. Adam, very good to see you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Michael. I have to say, I've agreed with almost everything that the panelists have said. I think there's huge scope for the use of technology to address this critical issue. I would rather sort of controversially like to back up a bit and just ask the panelists, is there still a gap at all between the major tech companies' sort of scope 4 emissions compared to their scope 1s, i.e., Apple may be green neutral in 5 years, but obviously they produce a lot of products that contribute to a lot of power consumption, and data centers are huge power consumption. So is there a bit of an argument where one needs to look in the splinter in one's own eye a bit as a tech company, that even if Google's own emissions are tiny, someone sitting on Google for 24 hours a day, 360 days a year, does that have an energy consumption that perhaps the tech companies could combine, perhaps to see whether there is anything to be done on reducing energy consumption as opposed to just making it neutral through the clever use of technology? I couldn't agree more with all you're saying, but there's $1 trillion of market cap in the top 10 tech companies. 5% of that would be 500 billion, which would be an amazing contribution towards green energy sort of sources. And I just wonder, am I getting it completely wrong, or is there still a bit of a role to play indirectly of the tech companies on actual premium energy consumption?
That's a great question. Let me start with Peter, and then I'll go to Ampi, but I'll start with you first, Peter.
Thanks, Michael. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Look, I think the answer to the question is yes. So yes, I think that all of the tech companies and those, for us being the biggest of the technology consulting and services companies, I think we have that obligation in the same way as I think the tech companies have. I like scope 4. Technically we call it scope 3, but I get your point, which is the end customer usage of energy or an ability to adapt or abate with regards to climate change. I think it's well made. I think it's fair to say that increasingly that is where we are all focused. So I think there are different ways to look at it. Most of us now, so for example, Accenture is committed to a 1.5 degree net zero science-based target by 2025. We'll be 100% renewable energy by 2023, and we're already there in India, which is one of our biggest areas because of 260,000 people based in India, who are using our facilities, our servers, and so on. So there's an element of this which is, even if you are, and Google is 100% renewable, for example, and many of the other tech players, the Microsofts and Amazons, are either there or on their way. So in that sense, if you're using a server and you're in the cloud, you're essentially, computing power is zero carbon. However, I don't think that's what you mean, and I think it's more fundamental, which is the real story for us should be that we should be creating orders of magnitude greater carbon abatement or adaptation by equipping our clients in their core businesses to manage things differently. That's how we see it at Accenture. So over the course of the next 3 years, as part of the Accenture Sustainability Value Promise, which I lead and which our CEO Julie and I put together, we will move to measuring the carbon footprint of every single project that we do, regardless if it's related to sustainability, not just our own carbon footprint of the project work that we do. So in other words, the travel involved or the energy intensity of the computing that we use to solve the client problem, but the capability we leave at the client. So when they've transitioned to the cloud, or let's say they've gone through and added Internet of Things and the management of their physical supply chains and infrastructure, what is the sustainability impact, not just carbon, but actually carbon is very important, of the capability we've built for them? Does it help them to reduce their emissions and head toward net zero and over a longer period of time? And that's going to apply to security, cyber tech. It's going to apply to software and enterprise performance. It's going to apply to our work on data and analytics, our work on artificial intelligence, our work on the cloud, our work on supply chain transformations, every single project. So I think we're not there yet. I think that's the industry's leading ambition. I think I'm proud of that rather than complacent about it. I hope the whole industry comes together and does that. But that's the story for me. It is the multiplier. We've got to get our own houses in order, 100%. And you can't be a credible advisor unless you have your own house in order. But I think the real story is the incredible multiplier effect of, well, we may have increased computing power, it will go to net zero, but on top of that, it's about the computing and the technology power that changes the capabilities of firms and changes the way at a systems level that markets work and that firms work within those markets. So that's, for me, is the real answer to Adam's question.
But Ampi, let me ask you, from the Google Cloud perspective, there are products out there that people are using which do use energy. Do you build that? Are you factoring that into your plans and ambitions?
It's a very good question. I'll also then capture the question that was raised and talk about what Google is doing with regards to our extended value chain. So this is a collective agenda. So it's not just our own business processes, but to be able to then address this issue, it's a collective action across the entire value chain. And what we're doing in our direct and indirect suppliers is that we're investing 5 gigawatts of new carbon-free energy in manufacturing regions, which is helping 500 cities reduce their carbon emissions, and finding new ways to support people through our products make sustainable choices. So you mentioned about people are using. So with regard to some of the enablers is providing the choice. So if you're going to be walking, you're saving this amount of green energy as part of our Google Maps. Just a basic example on how we are enabling through our products, make sustainable choices easier for everyone.
Michael, do you mind if I chip in?
Sorry, Mauro.
Yeah, do you mind if I chip in on this one?
I'm just about to ask you to do so. Please do.
Thank you. Look, I mean, I think Adam is absolutely right. And that is not a 2030 problem, but it is a 2050 problem. Because as long as we are in a logic of reducing emission, what both Peter and Amy said is absolutely correct. Companies who are serious about this are enabling the move to activities which overall will use less energy. But they still use energy, and the energy is growing. I mean, the figure that Peter mentioned about moving to 200 million connected devices. If you talk to the communication companies and you hear what they say about the number of the level of connectivity the 5G will enable, in many ways frightening. Now, we have policies, and we think everybody should adopt policies to put in parallel the technology shift with the shift to clean sources of energy. So in a 2030 perspective, this is still manageable. But in a net zero perspective, our target is predicated on cutting energy consumption by 50% between now and 2050. In that perspective, this is a problem that we have to look at. It is not the most urgent problem. We are still struggling with eliminating the emissions from the traditional economy, but we have to start working on, and the new technologies are helping us eliminate the emission from the traditional economy. But the point will come sooner rather than later that we have to start developing a way of coping with the emissions that the new economy is going to create.
Okay. Now, Peter, by the way, has put some information into the chat function, so take a look at it. He's sent some links. But let's move on to our next question now. Peter Godfrey, Managing Director for Aipac at the Energy Institute. Peter.
Thank you, Michael, and greetings from Singapore. And just going on from Mauro's comment about eliminating emissions in the traditional economy versus the new economy, and some of the points that Peter was making about investment increasing, but we actually need to create an order of magnitude change if we want to get to where we want to. I'd like to focus firmly on COP26 and the most tricky issue of all, which is Article 6, relating to carbon price and carbon tax. So I have two core questions to ask the panel. One, do we need carbon price and markets, or do we need carbon tax, or do we need both? Question number one. Question number two, can these be applied generically to all industry sectors, or should they be driven by a more sector-focused regulatory framework and policies that put them in place on the basis that clearly the hydrocarbons, oil and gas industry, the agricultural sector, the industrial sectors all have different value chains and all have different fundamentals on how to manage carbon markets?
Thank you. Great question. Now, Mauro, definitely you'll have a view on this, but I'm going to start with Peter and Ampi and come to you to conclude this controversial discussion. Peter, you first.
Thanks, Michael. I think Mauro is the best to answer the question. From a business perspective, what is absolutely clear, and certainly I can speak, I think, on behalf of the 100 CEOs I've just finished interviewing and the 1,000 that we surveyed for this UN survey that comes out, that there's a very high expectation at COP. I actually probably am a little bit less optimistic we'll be able to achieve everything that we want to achieve at COP, but I do hope we can, and we should put the pressure on. And clearly Article 6 is a major component of that for sure. I think what we certainly need is if you hear business leaders, what we need is a carbon price, and we need that to drive markets and to drive capital investment and to bring the level of certainty and security that would allow us to unleash the incredible amounts of capital that Peter rightly points out that we need in order to achieve the low carbon transition and actually sustainability more generally. Because although we're talking about carbon a lot today, one of the things that come out a lot out of those recent interviews is particularly the incredible concern emerging around biodiversity and nature, which is not divorced from climate in any way, right? It's absolutely integrally linked to the way that we tackle climate. And I think what we will see, but again, Mauro is better placed, is that I don't think we live in a nice, neat global world where that we can actually see one global set of markets, one global set of solutions. I think we live in a much more messy world. I don't think the sort of the flat world thesis is true. I think there's lots of hills and lots of geopolitical challenges, but I'm confident that we will see far greater shift towards that after COP. And I think there'll be a messy mix of regional and national, which is a bit difficult to navigate as a business, being honest. So the more global, the better. At least the more supranational, the better. So I'm happy with whatever solution that actually produces that clarity of carbon price and that clarity of investment. And then as businesses, we can do what we should be doing, which is not playing games challenging regulation. It should be competing as innovative players within markets where the rules are set and they're clear. Right? That's what we should be doing.
Mauro, I've got to go to you now, especially given CBAM and the discussions that have taken place since you launched those proposals.
Well, look, the quick answer to Peter Godfrey's question is all of the above. I mean, first of all, we need carbon pricing. We need to price carbon. And everybody is doing it. You know, you'll have companies adopting an implicit carbon price. The choice of the instrument, you have freedom. I mean, at the end of the day, we chose a carbon market for institutional reasons. It was too complicated to do a European level carbon tax. But the more we work with our carbon price, the more we like what it's doing. It's much more flexible than a tax. It adapts itself very quickly up and down. It rewards those who pollute less almost automatically. So we are by now convinced that carbon markets have advantages over carbon taxes in establishing an effective carbon price. But carbon markets, like all markets, need regulation. So you cannot, you know, the market doesn't happen in a vacuum, as Peter was saying. What we are experimenting with now is expanding the sectors. The question is, does it apply to all sectors? I don't know. We've applied it very effectively to all industry and power generation. We're now going to experiment bringing in shipping, road transport, buildings, and we'll see whether we can make that work. But alone, it doesn't do the trick. Let me give you one example. Road transport. If we just have carbon price applied to road transport, what does it do? Increase the price of petrol at the pump. We've been increasing petrol at the pump in Europe for decades with taxes. It has never led to a decline in traffic. You need to have clean cars. You need to make them available and affordable. You need a charging infrastructure that enables people to use it rationally. And then if you have carbon price that, you know, puts the price up, you have people shifting. So a combination of regulation and pricing, like in every other field of the economy, is what you need. There's no field of the economy where regulation alone does the trick, and there's no field of the economy where taxes and pricing of an externality alone do the trick. I think you do need to put things together. Article 6 is, this is not to say it's less important, but it's a second tier issue. First, you need carbon prices. Then you need a mechanism to trade between them. At the moment, there isn't much to trade with. We could have a perfect Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. It wouldn't do very much because, you know, not many people are trading carbon prices because not many people have them.
Okay, Ampi, I do want to put this one to you, especially with your supply chain expertise. And a lot of the sort of reading I've done about CBAM is there's great concern about how one will manage supply chains under a CBAM regime. So your take on this one, please.
Yeah, supply chain is 80% of the greenhouse gas emissions just because of the very nature of how supply chains operate, from sourcing, manufacturing, and distribution. So I'd like to look at the value of, again, I go back to how we need to then have a real focus in terms of understanding where data is showing where the crux of the issues are, and really identify the solutions that are needed to then solve the problems in supply chain. So I do believe that tapping into a better understanding of where the key sources of emissions are and looking at how technologies can then support is where we should be focusing our efforts within the supply chain arena.
So thank you very much. There's a lot of conversation going on in the chat box, but we need to leave this conversation now. So sorry for those who wanted to ask questions, but I can see that some of our panelists are answering you anyway.
Is it possible to then just talk about just 3 core processes when we look at how we are doing it? So if you look at 3 core processes and I think for supply chain, it's important to then look at how we're leveraging visibility and intelligence across 3 core processes. First, on supply chain design, And this predetermines your carbon footprint in your product innovation and as well as your network design. So I'll do this quickly. The second one is track and trace monitoring.
Yes.
We do have a number of tools that are available already, blockchain, 5G sensors, that gives us real-time visibility to then help us look at chain of custody in the value chain. And the last one is within our supply chain execution, is to be able to then look at how we're driving better energy consumption, waste reduction, and a much more informed decision and broader view of each organization's carbon impact.
Great. Look, we have to leave the conversation there. Thank you very much indeed to all of you. And thanks for your questions. Again, apologies I couldn't get to all of you that were pouring in at the end. My thanks to Ampi Asman from Google Cloud, to Maura Petriccioni from the EU, and also to Peter Lacey from Accenture. Thank you all very much for joining us, but stay with us because moving now to David Wallerstein, who's Chief Exploration Officer and Senior Executive Vice President of Tencent. David drives Tencent's participation in new technologies, new business areas, research collaborations, and ideas. David has worked on building Tencent's international footprint and entrance into new business areas since 2001. Working with Naspers, he drove their early investment into Tencent, and he subsequently joined Tencent's executive team. At the time, he was telling me yesterday, Tencent had a staff of 45. I looked it up online just before this program. It's now in excess of 85,000. So it's been quite a journey. David is the author of Re-Architecting Earth, AI for FEW, which is food, energy, waste. And he's also producer of documentary film Day Zero, which I believe is going to come out in the UK very shortly and is already getting some release in Europe. David, thanks for joining us. So good to see you. Really good chat with you. I want to start though with a focus on artificial intelligence and how you see it moving the dial on sustainability.
Yeah, great. Thank you for having me. And really interesting to catch the last panel and hear all the debates going on there. I think I want to clarify, artificial intelligence is kind of like a computer science revolution. It can be applied to almost anything in the same way that internet or mobile services can apply to anything. And what I have in mind when I talk about artificial intelligence is primarily how to actually affect processes in the real world, such as industrial processes, agriculture, energy, water treatment, all these areas, in ways that result in less emissions occurring in the first place. So it's really about minimizing actual, industrial impacts or ecological impacts, and then optimizing how we're running all the processes that we depend on for our survival. When you talk about food, energy, and water, these are things that humanity must actually accomplish, even as we achieve these goals, such as climate goals, right? So, so basically, we released a book earlier this year at Tencent called Re-Architecting Earth, AI for Food, Energy, and Water. And the book really talks about how when you apply artificial intelligence in these areas, you can achieve very significant gains. And it will depend on the industry and the case. But I think as a general rule of thumb, we believe it's pretty typical that you achieve roughly like a 20% gain in efficiency when you start applying intelligent strategies for optimizing a process. And maybe I just give you an example of this, if it's okay.
Please,
make sure everyone can hear me. Sometimes I give a whole speech and someone tells me I've been on mute.
No, well, I promise you,
okay.
We're hearing you loud and clear.
Okay, good. So, before I dig in, but for example, in the agricultural area, we find that if you want to maximize the productivity of a plant, let's say almonds or something that grows on a vine that people are going to eat, usually human beings around the world are giving those plants too much water. So if you just try to optimize the health of the plant, you're often saving up to 40% water to actually maximize your output. Your goal wasn't necessarily to save on water. Your goal was to maximize output, but we're finding that there's a lot of waste around the world. When you're focused on just optimizing for your targeted outcome, you may end up having significant savings. So you're really getting the best of both worlds, more productivity, less waste. And this isn't just about climate, this is just about waste in general. It could be water and things like that. So when you do something similar, you go to a coal-fired plant, let's say, which still exists. Having a discussion with Asia House today, there's a lot of coal-fired plants around the world, including in Asia. And you were to say, okay, your goal is to maximize the output of electrons from your power generating facility, your coal-fired plant. because you have a large population dependent on energy. Let's look at how you can become more efficient, let's say, in the, for example, amount of coal that you burn. If you're going to run these processes, it's entirely in everyone's interest at every point in the value chain to minimize the amount of coal you're burning. Why are you burning coal in the first place, by the way? Because you want a furnace to be hot. You're actually trying to achieve a certain temperature, right? And then you're running water through the process, and then that's turning into water vapor, and it's turning a turbine. So you can say, look, how do I minimize the amount of coal being burned so I maximize the heat in here, or get it in the right zone, let's say, and also minimize the amount of water that we're using, which is also central to the process. And then I'm maximizing my objective, which is the amount of electricity coming out of the process. And we find time and time again that when you do that and you look at applying artificial intelligence to the process, you can achieve these very significant gains. You know, maybe in that area, it may not be 20%. I think we still have to do more testing to figure out exactly where the amount of efficiency that you can achieve. But we do anticipate in this kind of area substantial gains. And you can apply it again and again and again.
David, sorry to interrupt, but I just want to be clear here. So what you're talking about is the application of artificial intelligence to existing processes, to existing coal plants, to farms.
Correct.
Because we have a lot of discussion about solar energy, about wind energy and new ways of producing energy. But one of the issues around that is the time lag. It takes a long time to build that up. So the artificial intelligence, solution, or the role it will play, is actually making existing processes, which may not be new technology, just more efficient and therefore better for the climate.
Yeah. Well, so that's why we have a book on this, because there's so many examples. And maybe the coal-fired plant example is a little bit, I just chose one off the top of my head. It's a little bit misleading. We're not necessarily promoting coal-fired plants or anything. So, we like solar, we like wind. But even with wind power, there's all kinds of ways you can use AI to optimize the output. And there's ways that you can use artificial intelligence to more intelligently, let's say, marry supply and demand, so that you have your big cycles happening in an economy or in a region occurring when you've maximized your green energy output. So the example I gave for coal-fired plants is actually optimizing a specific process, an actual thing that that can be optimized. And I'm saying if you're going to run those plants, the least you could do is optimize it for the cost, low cost software and all these things. But it is something that can truly work its way through the global economy, through the energy sector, through the agriculture sector. By the way, if you're pumping more water, that's also using energy, which is why we like to use this framework of food, energy, and water, because when you're saving on water pumping, for example, in agriculture, you're also saving on the energy to pump the water. And this could often result in a few percentage points of energy consumption in a nation. So if you save, so it's very helpful to think about these strategies, although it's difficult, it's maybe not so intuitive, it's not an immediate reaction that we get, to think about things in a more complex way and imagine how, when you save and you drive efficiency, you have multiple benefits accruing in the economy simultaneously. So because now when we talk about carbon, we're very focused on just sequestering carbon, right? But actually, humanity has a lot more challenges ahead of it than just that. When we talk about climate change, the flip side of climate change is complexity around the world with water, for example. Too much in some places, not enough in others, like where I'm from in California. We have very significant droughts and fires. So how do we, the beauty of the FEW framework, food, energy, water framework, is that by being more efficient, you can actually accomplish these multiple goals at once, right? You're saving on energy, and you're having less waste in your energy production process. You're also saving on water. You're making your agriculture more efficient. You're also saving on energy. And artificial intelligence provides an opportunity to drive these efficiencies at a rate that's much more efficient than our human brains can calculate. Because on a daily basis, we don't know how many cars, electric vehicles just got home and started charging. We don't know when the spike of wind energy is going to be occurring in our area, or is it going to be a sunny day or not for solar, so on and so forth. But you can try to, through the market and the mechanisms you were talking about in the last panel, through intelligent pricing, you can actually start to now marry supply and demand very efficiently in a way that's reflected through price, using artificial intelligence. I don't, maybe ask me some more questions.
No, that's good. But I think one of the advantages, surely one of the advantages then of using AI is that dropping in software is quicker and cheaper than building a new plant of some sort or building new technology. Is that getting the recognition? I mean, in terms of the discussion on climate change,
Yeah,
I can't say
think
I
this is
hear
a new
very often
topic.
that the software solution should be up there with the wind power and the solar power.
Yeah, I think, well, so I think this is a new concept and it's a new topic, and I don't see it entering the debate that well. And it would probably benefit from spokespeople that could maybe explain it better than myself. But let's think about it this way. We absolutely need clean sources of power generation and to transform our economies, right?
Yes.
But this is the hardware aspect. On the other side, we need to be more efficient so we're not wasting our resources, even wasting our new green power, because it's totally possible that you have built a beautiful new solar plant, a gigawatt of power, but you're wasting it still, or you're doing things that are wasteful in other respects. And so think of artificial intelligence as kind of the rules of the game. It's actually the software that controls things in the real world is important. You can turn things on and off. You can turn switches on and off. You can run water or run a process on or off. It switches things, but it also embodies the rules of the game, such as the discussion we were having in the last panel on pricing or taxation. That could all be embedded ultimately in the software. So the software knows it is told to optimize for an outcome. And one of those outcomes can be minimize my cost, minimize price. So if the software gets a signal saying, oh, energy is going to be really cheap at 2 p.m. because your economy reflects that green energy is the lowest cost source of energy, then your system always knows that I'm going to be doing my work in my industrial facility at that time when the price is lowest based on a forecast or based on certain rules that are embodied in the software. So really software is where our intentions and our incentives that we put into an economy through pricing can actually be actuated without the human hands necessary, because so many things are happening in real time. And as long as the rules are embodied in software, then very intelligent decisions can be made, at the speed of light around the world.
Is there
And
enough
it
development
drives
going into this software?
efficiency.
Where do you see this software coming from? Have you got startups looking at it? Are you looking at startups?
Because
Where's it coming from?
Yeah, so the short answer to that is we'll know that things are on the right track when everyone you're talking to is working on this kind of software optimization type strategies. It seems like everyone's getting in the game. It's just as hot as buying the next Dogecoin or Bitcoin. Everyone's doing it. Why are these valuations going up for all these artificial intelligence for climate startups? Then you'll know we're on to something, because not all these companies are going to be successful. There are so many areas to optimize. I gave that agricultural example, or maybe there's a company that wants to focus on coal-fired plants in Asia or something, or wherever in the world. There's a niche for everyone. This is a massive new opportunity, and I think it's not getting the recognition. And I feel that's a huge. It's unfortunate because software moves at a different pace than these big infrastructure projects. It can be implemented overnight. You can go to an old coal-fired plant, and if they've got enough computer technology in there, you can start optimizing. I'm just using that as an example again. It can be anything. Software, as we know, you download it, you upload it, you put some data into it, and it can start to work right away. The cost should be low. You build it once, and then you have really no marginal cost for replicating it. Got some cloud computing costs and so on and so forth, but it is low cost and fast. It is a way that we can start reducing our emissions, start reducing associated waste within months around the world. And what we need right now around climate is urgency. We need a lot of strategies. We need a lot of approaches that all push us towards the same goal, but we really need urgency. And software in every case is going to move faster than infrastructure buildup and infrastructure transition. So it's something that someone can do now. And it doesn't mean that they don't shut down the coal-fired plant next year. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like, to use that example again, you can say, look, we're going to be going to solar by 2030. Every city's got their big plan by 2030, 2040. It's actually a long time. I'll be in my 60s by then. By 2040, when the city hits the goal, it's like, okay, good. Do that by 2030, 2040. How about this year you implement some software that reduces 20% of your waste in this area? And again, using that as a guideline. Let's challenge it. Sometimes it'll be above, sometimes it's going to be less, but why not take 10%? I'm just saying, do something right away based around intelligence that even if you're using that coal-fired plant that's been there for 80 years and everyone's employed there, no one wants to leave their jobs. It's like, okay, we have to solve an issue. It's delicate. Meanwhile, from next month, tell us where the bids are, who is going to be doing your intelligent software to help you reduce your waste in a way that's accountable, that's transparent. Sometimes, artificial intelligence, you don't exactly know how the models got the results and things like that, but it is accountable and everyone can understand that it's a system that generates a result that works well. So this is the idea. Accelerating change through efficiency. This is about conserving, not burning that coal, not burning those fossil fuels, and simply maximizing your green energy opportunity. Sometimes green energy is wasted around the world. It's not utilized properly. It has to be offloaded. In some countries, they say, we can't take all this renewable energy at once because supply isn't matching with demand. So you need intelligence then for matching that. Just imagine now when people get home around the world with an electric vehicle and you have populations with more and more electric vehicles, they all get home or get somewhere and they plug in the car at 6 p.m. on average. So you see this massive spike, right? Doesn't matter how much renewable energy you have. If your spike's up here, you're going to be going to these peaker plants, these natural gas or other types of plants, because you have this temporary thing and you say, well, we didn't figure out how to deal with that now. What if instead you had intelligence to say, look, this is where renewable energy is going to be today. People tend to like to plug in when they get home, but what if we say, no, give us 12 hours to find the right time to charge that car? And I'm going to save you money too, right? You're going to get a much better price on electricity if you agree that your car will be charged fully by 7 a.m. So we find that peak, that wind gust spurt, in your region, or if it's solar or whatever, we encourage people not to do that behavior, to charge during the day when solar's high. There's all kinds of things you can do, but it can become invisible to all of us because the intelligence is doing that for you based on a rule set, both by the society with taxation and things like that. And then the individual saying, I'd like to minimize my cost. Give me the lowest cost energy. And then you just need to make sure that green energy reflects the lowest price in the system. That this is what we're trying to achieve, whether it's taxation or other approaches, policies. We're just trying to say, how do we make it so green energy is the lowest cost energy available in a region, and that the dirty stuff is the most expensive? Right.
So this requires regulators and lawmakers to be involved, does it not? Are they engaged in this discussion? The regulators, what role will they play, or can they play?
I think it's really important because in many cases, utilities are involved, right? Whether it's the distribution of energy through many means, or the power generation, water utilities, they're all playing a big role, and they tend to be state-owned or locally owned. And they've been doing what they do very well, for decades. And it may not just be a habit to change and try new things, to be honest. And therefore, sometimes it can be slow for them to move. Sometimes, even when they think they're moving fast, it's not fast enough for startups or people in the business world that really need to sell solutions and get things going. And meanwhile, our climate is feeling the impacts. We're not moving fast enough on climate. So I think in many cases, this acceleration will happen in a way that can benefit local startups. If there is pressure from the top to say, these types of industries need to be doing something to drive efficiency with their operations, and they need some kind of efficiency software. It may not be called artificial intelligence related. I just believe that artificial intelligence tends to get the best results because of the way it works with data. But there could be other approaches, but it's using software to help you optimize your operation and make it more and more efficient. And what the utilities can do around the world is they can show the relevant stakeholders that they are making progress. They are becoming more efficient, with energy in many respects, that things are becoming more and more efficient over time. And then that enables the regulators to set more targets, saying, great, next year you should be this percent more efficient and that percent more efficient. And there's an accountability that's transparent. Public is aware that things are becoming more transparent, and everything should be working just as well as it does today, if not better, in terms of how we're using electricity and the resources that we need.
You're clearly a passionate advocate for this, and obviously put out the book, and you've got the documentary coming out shortly in the UK, although it's been released some places. But what specifically is Tencent doing? Are you investing in these technologies? I understand you're modeling different things, but give us a sense of specifically how Tencent's trying to achieve these goals.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I guess in Tencent, there's really three main areas that we would think about. One is our own operations. We need to do things to make our operations carbon neutral. And by far, looking at this now, it really is about space cooling for us. Actually, that's the biggest consumer of, if you look at a big computer science kind of company like Tencent, it's really cooling, space cooling by far, using the most energy, which results in CO2. But really around that is servers, keeping servers cool. And then the secondary impact would be human beings in buildings that we need to keep cool. And remember, like for companies based in Asia and around the world in hot areas, cooling is really, really important. So really, we're looking at how do we apply intelligence and other means in tandem to actually, reduce the emissions we have to keep our spaces cool, for IDCs and then people. And then we can build products. We have various products. We have artificial intelligence products that are more in the research and development phase around energy, and the kind of things I was talking about now for space cooling optimization, as well as agriculture, to optimize output for agriculture in a way that minimizes emissions. That's like one bucket. Another bucket is content development. We have all kinds. We're a major media company in China. We released that book that I wrote earlier this year. We have the movie Day Zero is the name, on the global water crisis. It was first released in China, and with a lot of dialogue about water challenges in China. That was earlier this year in April, now making the rounds through most of the world, actually. The UK will probably be an online streaming option when it comes out. But we do content. We have dialogues. Sometimes it's other people's content, sometimes it's our own self-produced content. And that's really important to actually help people around the world. We've got a very big Chinese audience, obviously, become more familiar with the science behind climate change. That's how you get more support for all kinds of initiatives and more people interested to start companies or get involved in companies doing something about it. And then the third area would be investments. And that's, I spend a bit of my time on all three of these areas, but in a typical day, I'm probably spending most of my time in investments. And that's truly just across the board, everything related to climate. We do think of climate in tandem with these core human needs, like how do we make energy more resilient, and what are the breakthroughs around energy that can just be better for the world while reducing emissions. Thinking about water, thinking about agriculture, thinking about transportation, and both ground transportation and even aviation, electric aviation or other forms of next generation sustainable aviation, for example. So that keeps us pretty busy. And we're a global company. So when you think of Tencent, obviously, we're China's our main market.
Yes.
Most of the stuff is happening there, but we're doing a lot internationally. Most of my work tends to be international with Tencent for 20 plus years now. So, we've been active internationally for 20 plus years, and we're always looking for startups. We support startups at the earliest stages, sometimes just 4 or 5 people. And then we can do really big investments, a few billion. We did a big investment in Tesla that was, that was 4 years ago. People wrote about that. Yes. So we can go at that later stage too, and we're just supportive to the whole ecosystem of companies out there that are trying to make a difference and doing it in very exciting ways.
Terrific. David, look, I'm afraid we have to leave it there because we're out of time, because it's 1:15. David, fascinating conversation. We could talk for hours about this. Thank you so much. You're clearly very passionate about it and doing a lot of very good things. So I hope we can welcome you back to Asia House again very, very soon. I'd like to thank all of my speakers today for what has been really fascinating, insightful conversation. And thank you too for all the participants who took part. This is a big issue, something we're going to be doing more on at Asia House. We have a COP26 series, but it's clearly very essentially for all our businesses, critically important for business, critically important for the planet. And policymakers and businesses are all very well engaged. So thank you all very much for joining us. Stay safe and stay well. Thanks to Accenture for working with us on this event, and we'll see you all again very, very soon. Take good care. Bye for now.